Nobody's anxious to get out and go to work in the yard, are they? And we have figured out how hopefully we can actually build and add 2 more rows back there. So anyway, didn't really anticipate we'd have quite so many people, but sure thank all of y'all for braving the construction mess and everything else and coming to see us. And I tell you what, it's going to be a great spring. Anybody wants to come in and sit on the ground, you're welcome to. I promise not to step on you or whatever, but yeah, there's still a little more room back here if anybody wants to climb up and get cozy. You know, I actually thought it'd be 20 degrees cooler and everybody really like to snuggle together here, but it's just kind of right in the middle. Just a real nice morning. Let everybody get settled, and I'm going to turn this off so we don't fry anybody with it. Go get my yoga mats and things like that. We'll do this again. Topic for today is pruning, and there is so much to talk about on the subject of pruning. I want to begin by giving you a little bit of an overview, sort of the physiology of the way things grow and sprout in the spring. And I'd be the first to tell you, as an old biology teacher, I'm going to greatly oversimplify this. But I think if you understand a few of the principles of the way that things grow, the principles of what happens when you prune things back, then you can apply it to a whole wide range of things. Because we're going to talk about a bit about shrubs, a bit about trees, perennials, and as always, if you've got questions, specific things you want to talk about, we'll be more than happy to. But the truth is that just about every plant in your landscape needs pruning at one time or another, especially young things that you're just starting with. But first of all, just, you know, and we'll just use this overgrown salvia as an example. But where plants are coming out of what passes for a dormant season, anybody that's lived up north knows that we really don't ever have a dormant season here. We have tropicals and things that like to grow virtually year-round. But I'll say that we're coming out of our slowest period of growth, and that just means that we're about to explode into our highest period of growth. Now, there are lots of little dormant buds waiting to sprout on any plant. The bud that is right up at the top of a stem, right up here, the bud that is right up at the top of a stem here, or, you know, somewhere way up on the stems on the roses and things like that. The bud that's right up here at the top of the tree, that is referred to as an apical bud. And that is the bud that is most likely to sprout and grow, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Then there will be a series of smaller buds up and down the stem. And basically there will be a bud everywhere that a leaf comes off of a stem. There's a little bud that is either waiting to grow, or in some cases like this is actually starting to sprout out. If you look down here at where the stem on a leaf is called the petiole, where it joins the stem, right at that point, on virtually all plants, on roses, these are very easy to see, especially if you have a spot where a leaf has come off. Those are what we know of as lateral buds. And actually, in the case of a woodier plant like a tree or something like that, there are even more little, just totally undeveloped, totally undifferentiated buds, adventitious tissue, that is all the way up and down the stem. In the spring of the year, or actually at any time of year, the plant is producing a growth hormone, in effect, that rises up through the stem and rises as high as it possibly can. When it gets to the top of the stem, it begins to concentrate. And as it begins to concentrate, this is what stimulates the bud to break its dormancy and begin to grow. So if we didn't prune any plant back, that would go up, it would concentrate right at the top, and that little apical bud, that is the one that's going to sprout and grow. And in many cases, in the case of a tree, of a shade tree, that is a good thing. In the case of a fruit tree, probably we don't want that, because we don't want a fruit tree you have to climb on a ladder to get up and get to the fruit. In the case of a pittosporum, we don't want that plant growing 6 feet tall and being bare and leggy at the base. So when we cut a plant back, when we cut a stem back on a plant, what happens? That hormone continues to rise up the stem, and when it gets to the top, whatever point we've cut it off, it begins to concentrate at that point. And depending on the plant, depending on how healthy the plant is, depending on a lot of different things, it will concentrate and it will make one or more of those buds begin to sprout and grow. That's why if we cut this plant off right here and this hormone is rising up here, it's going to make these buds up here, one or more of them, sprout and grow a long time before it's going to make anything down here sprout and grow. Does that make sense? Okay, it's really important to remember for a lot of different reasons when we're pruning things. We can use this to our advantage in a number of different ways, and there's some things that we really want to avoid when you keep these principles in mind. Now, I say we can use it to our advantage, and I'm going to use this rose bush as an example. I think I can safely set it up here. You know, roses, on root roses, don't have to have a lot of pruning, and we're going to come back and talk about individual plants and the timing and the things like that. But the main reason we prune rose bushes and things like this is that we want them to grow the shape that we want them to grow. We want to be able to determine how big they get and the overall shape that they grow. Always remember now that in the case of a rose, when you cut this stem, you've got this hormone rising up. It's going to make the uppermost bud sprout and begin to grow, right? Well, if we strip off a few leaves here, as probably, you know, a lot of yours may have already dropped their leaves. And remember, there is a little dormant bud right here at the base. Now I've exposed it so you can see there's a bud here, there's a bud here, there's a bud here, there's a bud here, there's a bud here. If you can't see that right now, you can certainly come up and look at these things a little bit later. But now, let's say I want this rose bush to grow outward in this direction. Do I cut it right here? No, because that bud's pointing back this way. Where do I prune it? I'll prune it just above what we would refer to as an outward-facing bud, or occasionally, if we want a plant to be more upright, I would prune it right above this bud if I wanted the growth to come out this way. I would prune it right above this bud if I wanted the growth to come out this way. I would prune it right above this little dormant bud right here if I wanted to grow back inwards. Keep that in mind when you're pruning things like roses. You can very definitely determine the shape in which this plant is going to grow. It means you've got to look carefully at the tissue that you're cutting off. And if you'll do that, you can really determine what direction your rose bush is going to grow. And sure, it takes a little bit more time. You have to go through, and it doesn't take a lot of time. You know, if I want this thing growing outward, I'll go through and prune this one back here. If I want this one growing outward, I'll cut that one in just a second. If I want this one growing, well, here's an example. Right here, this was cut off for whatever reason. It was cut off or broken off. Which shoot developed? The bud immediately behind it. We'll talk more. We'll come back and talk about rose bushes more in a minute. But it is important on all plants, especially on bigger, woodier plants, that you always either cut above a bud, or let's say you want to reduce the size of a pecan tree or something like that, and the trunk's this big or the limb is this big around and all woody, you obviously can't see exactly where the buds are. But the worst possible thing you can do is just cut it at a random point. And I'll use a pecan tree for an example, because people plant them and they get too big and then they want a little tree, so they shouldn't have planted a pecan tree to begin with. But anyway, now that it's there, you don't want to cut it down, and you want it to be a smaller size. Worst thing you can do on a pecan or an ash or anything like that is just lop it off at a random point. Because then what happens? All of this little adventitious bud layer around here begins to sprout and grow.